In this example, we are looking at a piecewise function that is telling us the distance that an Ironman triathlon participant has traveled t hours after the race has begun. So what we can see is that this depends on which portion of the race that participant is in. So initially, they start off swimming, so that's what the top piece corresponds to. Then they turns to the run portion of the race, and then the last portion of the race is when they are on a bike. And so with these piecewise functions, we want to be careful, and that is these are functions. So function is the important word here, meaning that for each input, I should have only one output. So I don't take an input to take a look at part A of when t is 0.5 and plug it into top, bottom, middle, and bottom piece and get three different outputs. Based on the input, I need to figure out which piece I should use. And so since 0.5 falls in the interval between 0 and 1.2, this means I use the top piece. So what we have is since t equals 0.5 hours is in the portion that falls between 0 and 1.2. This means we're going to use the top piece to evaluate the function. Therefore, f of 0.5, the top piece says take 2 times t. So I would multiply 0.5 by 2, and that gives me 1 mile. So what this means is half an hour, 30 minutes into the race, they've traveled 1 mile. And since it starts off by swimming, that this person has swam a total of 1 mile. In part B, we're now looking at an input of 2. So again, the first thing I do is I say, well, which one of these pieces does t equal 2 fall in? Well, it's bigger than 1.2, so I'm not in the top piece. And it falls right between 1.2 and 6.8. So that means I'm going to use the middle piece to figure out the distance that I've traveled. So since t equals 2 is in the interval 1.2 to 6.8, that's the piece we're going to use. We evaluate f of 2 using that middle piece, and we take 20 times 2 minus 21.6, and evaluating this gives us a total of 18.4 miles. So 2 hours into the race, this person has traveled 18.4 miles. Okay, in part C, we now have t is 1.5. So we come over to our function and we say, where does 1.5 fall? Well, not in the top interval. 1.5 falls between 1.2 and 6.8. So again, this means we use the middle portion. And since t is equal to 1.5 is in the interval from 1.2 up to 6.8, we get f of 1.5 is equal to 20 times 1.5. We use the middle function to evaluate, and that gives us a total of 8.4 miles. So 1.5 hours into the race, 90 minutes into the race, they've traveled 8.4 miles. They finished the swim portion and they just began the running portion. All right, and finally in part D, now our output is 8.6, and 8.6, a t-value of 8.6 falls in the interval from 6.8 to 9.71, corresponding to the very bottom piece. So to evaluate this last one, since t equals 8.6, falls in the interval from 6.8 to 9.71, we use the bottom piece, and therefore f of 8.6 we get by multiplying that by 9. So we say 9 times 8.6 plus 53.2. And evaluating this gives us 130.6. So this means 8.6 hours into the race, they have traveled a total of 130.6 miles, almost done with the race. And again, I really want to emphasize that in each of these parts, whenever we evaluate a piecewise function, we only get one value out because it is a function. And so we use the input to figure out which piece we're going to use. And then once we determine which of the pieces we use based on the t-value, then we pick only one of the expressions to evaluate to get only one output.